Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of these two guys, which are actually just one guy basically. That's the Monterey Bay Knives Sprocket. First off though, in the name of full disclosure, I want to thank Monterey Bay Knives for loaning these guys my way. They said, hey Nick, you want to take a look at the Sprocket? I said, sure, why not, right? And they loaned these guys my way. I'm going to pack them up, send them back to Monterey Bay here before too long, but nevertheless, we do have to assume these are the very best quality controlled little sprockets here ever, and I'm doing my best not to let that affect the substance of my review. And of course, they know how I work. I gave them the full disclosure on my disclaimer on my website. Nonetheless, there you go. Next thing, let's do some size comparison, and I'm just going to go ahead and I'll use the Thai version for this. That way, same basic size. Here they are against the Ontario Rat number 2 here. The Ontario Spyderco Delica. The Ontario Spyderco Delica. It's been a freaking day, okay, people? And then here it is against the Spyderco PM2. So what we can see here is that we are looking at a relatively similar blade length to the PM2 in terms of sharpened length. Yeah, nevertheless, the handle is a little bit smaller. That's something to consider. Next thing, and perhaps the most relevant thing about this knife is that this guy is a design by Gerry McGinnis. In case taking absolutely just one half of a look at this doesn't tell you this is a McGinnis, yeah, it's a McGinnis. Gerry McGinnis is it's an American knife designer, etc. Reasonably well known. This is based on his Sprocket model, which is not shocking given that the knife itself is called the Sprocket. So this is sort of a production version of one of his custom knives. And finally, I do want to thank, although I always appreciate their company and insight and whatnot, I want to thank Eugene Kwan, Epic Snuggle Bunny, Levon from Knife Nuts, and some other friends for helping me to understand this knife better. On occasion, it's nice to have some folks who are also sort of just to bounce ideas off of, and they really helped to crystallize some of my thoughts on this one. So that was very kind of them, and I do very much appreciate it. So anyways, let's go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of these very interesting little sprockets right here, and take a look at these pieces of gear, because it's a gear review. Oh, I should have saved that for the end, damn it. All right, anyways, I digress. So, first off, on the good side, the ergonomics on these guys are nice. Provided that you're liking this sort of a further back away from the blade grip, the ergos are absolutely on point here. The clip being relatively wide is helpful there. The amount of contouring and rounding that you get here, I mean, that's definitely a nice thing, so that's good. Next thing, this guy has a very nice action. Both of them are absolutely 100% easy to deploy. They've got a very nice no wrist, no nothing. These are so, and they're both actually quite uniform in terms of their detent. This guy, it's absolutely good to go action-wise. And in terms of the fall shut, they're not the smoothest things ever, but at the same time, they're absolutely fine, especially given the price point. I'm not necessarily a big concerned about that. So the action on both of these is definitely a strong point. You've also got some quality of life features. For instance, you got yourself a stainless lock bar insert here, over travel stop, etc., which is nice. Blade on this guy is actually our next point. It is an M390 steel, which chemically speaking is one of the best steels out there right now. And it has a very nice swedge on the top there, and it's got an interesting blade shape to it. You have to like a recurve, and a recurve isn't anyways. But it has a nice blade shape to it, and the grind on it is actually relatively thin. It's not the thinnest thing necessarily ever, but it's definitely better than a lot of what we're seeing in the modern knife market. So at the very least, I do appreciate that very much. And so the blade is very nice. Then finally, on the good side, I actually kind of appreciate the amount of jimping on this guy. So not only is there jimping up all along this surface and on the bottom of the flipper tab, but there's a little bit down here as well. And that means that this knife isn't going anywhere. Not only does this big old flipper tab serve as basically a blade guard, prevents you from going up onto the blade, but also this jimping here is nice, and frankly, it's aesthetically attractive as it kind of curves around to the top there. I mean, I don't know whether it's called the Sprocket because of that, because it looks a little geary, let's be real here. But I do actually like that, and this combined with the good ergonomics overall make this guy a very solid knife in the hand. So to me, at least, all that is the good. Is very nicely jimped there. It's got a very solid blade with M390, a nice swedge, and a recurve, which can be nice for some cutting tasks. It's got a good, strong action. Oh, and then finally, I'm sorry, I forgot the one of the good piece here is that this is absolutely 100% identifiably a McGinnis. It has his unique design style, his unique approach, so keep that in mind. But that is also good. And then finally, it has very nice ergonomics. On the great side is actually kind of related to that last good point that I forgot to mention, which is that that this is the great thing about this, and in fact, the piece of news about this knife, the thing that makes this knife feel like it's worthwhile, is that this is a very low-cost, relatively speaking, way to own a McGinnis custom knife. This is basically a McGinnis custom. You take a look at this, and you're just like, wow, yeah, every part of this feels like a McGinnis Sprocket, right? And given I haven't handled the exact custom model, but I think I've handled some of Gerry's overall stuff, and this feels 100% like it. It is a faithful reproduction of his custom knife, but it's sold for $225, and it's done in production, so you can buy more of them, and you can get it more readily. And so, if you are a fan of McGinnis designs, generally speaking, of this model, and although there's a lot of similarity to his other models as well, but if you are a fan of his work, this knife gives you a chance to own what is a relatively faithful, it seems, reproduction of a custom knife at a price point of $225, which is not trivial, but it's a heck of a lot better than trying to track down a custom from the guy. So to me, at least, that's what's great, is this is a good opportunity for fans of McGinnis design to actually own a knife that is, well, very much him. On the bad side, first off, I gotta say, in terms of the weight, the titanium one is a little bit on the heavier side. This guy comes in here at 4.32 ounces for, actually, let me measure up the blade length real quick here, around 3.25, or I'm sorry, around 3.5 inches of blade, maybe 3.4 some odd. But either way, it's not a super amazing amount of blade length, or I'm sorry, length to weight ratio. The carbon fiber one comes in closer to 3.4, so this is around an ounce an inch. So this one, to me, is just a little bit lighter, a little nicer, a little more carryable. And so the titanium one, though, is definitely a little bit heavy, and that's something to keep in mind. Next thing, this guy does have a recurve to it. If we put this guy up against a flat surface, for instance, this ruler here, what we see is there is a substantial gap between the, there is a substantial little recurve in there. Look, is that a problem? No, not necessarily. Where it can become problematic is if you are planning to try and do sharpening with a flat bench stone. In that case, this really isn't going to work well. This is going to be better suited to a guided sharpening system. I'm sorry, not necessarily guided, but to a rod-based sharpening system or something along those lines that can really get up into that curve effectively. And so if you are using either a guided system with wide stones or a flat bench stone, this recurve is definitely going to be a pain in your neck. You might be able to pull it off, but still, it's going to be a problem. And it's not a big enough recurve in many cases. This is sort of, I think he's committing to it, but it's not an incredibly large recurve, like a strong design. I don't know. Whatever. Not a big fan of recurves personally, and this one here, perhaps even less so. Next thing, clip on this guy. The clip on this guy is okay in a lot of ways. I mean, in terms of as a functional pocket clip, it's got the requisite spring and whatnot, and it actually is a milled clip and everything. My biggest gripe with the clip is that the clip is right on top of this little area right here, where you get your lock bar relief, etc. That's not necessarily ideal. And so as a result, as you pulling this guy out of your pocket, you're definitely going to be snagging on this little area here, which is a very, very sharp little, it's not actually a sharp angle that's rounded off there, but nevertheless, you're going to be snagging on things. Having this external lock bar relief with this clip right there, not as much of a fan of that. Mind you, I get that it has to be external, given that you're rounding up on the top there, but still, not a big thing. Next thing, the backspace of fitment here isn't necessarily good. If we take a look here, and I'm definitely nitpicking here, but you can see here that this side is substantially smoother than this side here. I'll kind of zoom in a little bit. Yeah, so there's a much bigger gap over here, a different elevation change, and then same thing over here with this, what appears to be a carbon fiber backspacer. It's just harder to visualize on the camera here, but nonetheless, what you can see here is that there is some gapping here. It's simply not, the backspace of fitment doesn't feel amazing, especially relative to some of the stuff that you see from other makers. So I'd like to have maybe seen either standoffs there or just a little bit more effort to make sure that that's a smooth surface rather than just being rather than being, what it is. So there you go. Next thing, this is a very thick blade. It's not a super tall blade, but it is definitely a thick one. We're coming in, I believe, at around 4 millimeters worth of blade stock there. That's, yeah, that's not amazing. I don't know why I do length in inches, but stock in millimeters. I don't freaking know. Either way, not like any of my measurement systems make sense. Sorry, guys. Metric, you win. But nonetheless, this is a relatively thick blade. And you know what? I'll be honest. You could go a little bit thinner at this edge, and I would be a happy man. That's pretty much always universally true. But I definitely don't see why the blade stock on this guy is as thick as it is. I mean, one of the consequences of having a relatively thick edge is that the blade heel is a little creepy close up here. I wouldn't want to get this blade heel altogether too sharp. It's okay. It's not like the flat out, this is trying to kill you right now close, but it's definitely a thing to consider there. And so I'm not a big fan of having that there, and having the thick blade stock exacerbates that issue. I just feel like this might have been a slightly more compelling knife for everyday use if it were a little bit thinner in the blade, which made a thinner edge, I don't know. So that's definitely not something I'm in love with. And then finally, this guy is faithful to the custom in many ways, but one of the ways, unfortunately, is that you got your screws going straight into titanium on the back there. Now, is this an actual major issue in daily life? No, not really, but I do worry that if you were to strip out the screw hole here, that means that the knife isn't going back together, period. It's not like you can go and get a new standoff or order. It's just like your entire lock side of the knife is gone, or you're taking it to a machine shop to have them try and build and that's not something I necessarily like. So I tend to prefer, especially in a production style knife, where they're using something like screwing into the back spaces here, using a Chicago screw sort of arrangement. I feel like that's generally a safer approach rather than going straight into the tie. I know that this is super common in the custom knife world, and if it's one guy at a drill press, I totally get it, but this is a product coming out of a major factory. That doesn't do it for me. And so to me, at least, all that is the bad, is that the screws are going straight into the titanium on both models here. The blade heel is a little close to the back, and that's partly because the blade stock is so damn thick, which makes the edge a little bit thicker than maybe I'd like to see, although it ain't so bad. The back space's fitment just isn't that impressive. The clip positioning relative to this lock bar relief is not amazing. It has a recurved blade, which is going to annoy a lot of people, and it is a little bit heavy in the titanium model, although the carbon fiber is a little bit more reasonable. On the ugly front, honestly, some of those things feel a little ugly to me, particularly the blade heel and the thickness, but at the same time, I'm willing to acknowledge them to be, basically characteristics of the custom, so I don't know. Go ahead and take that as whatever you're worth. We'll go on ahead and jump into the conclusion then. On my conclusion front, you know what? This is a fine little knife. In fact, I know of a lot of folks who really do like it, because it does have nice ergonomics. It's got a unique design. It's a nice action, a good blade. And most importantly, it is custom style, if you like the McGinnis approach, at a very decent, price. The thing is, though, it does have some downsides. It is a little bit heavy in the titanium. It's recurved. The clip just doesn't seem to, the placement ain't great there. The space it fit, all these things we were just talking about, those are definitely downsides to me. And honestly, this feels a lot like a custom knife. What feels like, this feels like a custom knife was just shipped off to the factory and they said, here, make me more of these. And you know what? That's a fine approach at some level, but the thing is, they replicated the custom knife rather than making some of the quality of life tweaks that you often see when a custom knife goes into production. You go straight into the titanium rather than using, threaded backspacer or standoffs or something like that. The blade stock is thick. The heel is a little close. All of those things feel like things that are very common in the custom knife world, but are maybe very often paved over or edited during the production process. In a lot of ways, this feels a lot like a custom knife, and both in a good way and in a bad way. If you love the McGinnis custom knives, that's great, but there are things that lose their charm when it's no longer a jackass sitting at a drill press making the knife, so to speak. Well, not a drill press, I know the mills and whatnot, but nevertheless, when it's no longer one person working on it in his garage, there are things that feel a little bit less impressive. When you're up against all the modern production knives out there for $225, there are definitely things where I'd like to see those little quality of life improvements made to improve the overall model. And so you end up with something that feels much more like a custom knife that's been put into production rather than a production knife. And that's maybe not a distinction that's super important to a lot of people, but at least for me, it definitely is a difference. So I think what this kind of comes down to, and this is the thing that I struggled with a lot, because at some level I acknowledge this knife to be absolutely fine. And in fact, I can acknowledge parts of it to be great, the action and whatnot. But the thing is, you have to love this design. And I don't. This is personal. This is entirely personal. But for me, and again, Gerry, nothing but respect here, but the design language doesn't particularly speak to me. I don't like recurves. I don't, the whole thing just doesn't quite land for me. And so as a result, I realize I am deeply not the target market for this knife because I think this knife is a fan club knife. What I mean by that is that this is a knife that you buy and you sell, that basically you sell to people who really like Gerry McGinnis's work. And more specifically, who are really wanting a McGinnis custom but maybe can't afford it or just can't put hands on one. This is a knife that Gerry McGinnis or MBK together with him can sell to people who like this particular maker's work more than anything else. And I think that that's kind of important. This knife is a love letter to his fans. It's like, hey, here's a custom McGinnis, but we've done it a little bit more cheaply here, and we've done it in production. And so, ultimately, I feel like if you're just after an everyday tool, if you're watching this video because you're like, well, maybe I need a knife. And given the people on my channel who don't who need a knife, I think most of us are covered anyways. But if you're just looking at this as like an everyday tool, I don't know that this is where I would send you. If the design doesn't particularly do anything for you, frankly, there are a lot of really, really, really nice production knives that are coming in well under this price point. However, if you're looking at this design and going, oh yes, I love that. Or if you're a McGinnis fan who's been just like, oh God, I need to get more of his stuff in my life, but my budget don't do it, my availability, I've had trouble, then you're gonna love this knife. And so that's where this comes down to. This is a fan club knife. If you are a Gerry McGinnis fan, you are going to freaking love this knife, and you'll probably carry it very happily for a good long time. It'll do exactly what you need. But if you're just looking for a good production knife, honestly, this is probably not where I'm going to send you. So anyways, there you go. I hope this has been interesting to you, and that you have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of the day, and that you are a fan of this review, and that you're not going to blow a sprocket when you listen to it. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye now.